Anna, we're here together, apart but together. Wasn't that the name of the National Foreign Language Conference? I'm stealing it, okay? This is the third session of the ATF Hybrid Learning Series for French teachers, blending the classroom. So today we're focusing on assessment and feedback. And this is, you know, a lot of information for us, because this is possibly one of the most challenging experiences for the teachers who are either hybrid or distance. And there are some teachers here who are in class with their students. So let's just take a moment and look. If you are in class with your students, maybe wearing a mask, hopefully you better be wearing a mask, would you put up a number 1? Okay. If you are hybrid, so you see some of your students and some of them are at home, will you put up a 2? And 2, okay. If you are completely distanced, could you put up a 3? Okay, let's take a look. Yeah, me too. Well, see, so we know that each of us comes from lots of, you know, we come from different perspectives. And so as we share today, knowing that perhaps we're going to have different experiences, assessment and feedback can look very different. So there's a Zoom join code, you found that on the first, and now we have the reflection form for participation, and I'll put that in the chat at the end. So to receive this participation certificate, you must be live in the session. You must be alive. No, you must be in the session, and then we'll send that out. It sometimes takes a few days for the office staff to get through everybody. Okay, so if you don't get it tomorrow morning, please don't worry. We'll get it to you. Okay, so we have our session, and then we'll have the webinar chat and recording available about within 1 week of this session. And I'll show you where that is in just a moment. Okay, so we have this Padlet that we sent out, and hopefully you had an opportunity to get it on a question on the Padlet, but if not, don't worry, we're gonna have a breakout room just to start with. And you will, you'll be able to add questions to that. And our presenters said that they would maybe be able to answer those on the actual Padlet. Okay. So we are meeting at 1 hour earlier just because we have a special presenter from who's in a different country right now. I'm going to let them each present themselves. We have Tim Egan, Lisa Shepard, Andréane Anis, and Andu Montier. Just presenters, can you take a moment? I'm going to stop the share and let you present yourself. And we'll start with Tim.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Egan. I am department head in Wellesley, Massachusetts, which is just outside of Boston. And talking about feedback and assessment are really two of my favorite topics in education. And my husband would probably say 2 of my favorite topics ever. I'm really excited to be here this evening.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much for being here, Tim. Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Shepard. I'm here from Columbus, Ohio. I taught French for 29 years, and I'm currently doing have a consulting business. I'm doing professional development. I'm a Lang chat moderator, Lang book moderator, some different things like that. So it's great to see you. And I love IPAs from when I first, that kind of got me really involved in starting to teach for proficiency when in Ohio we started learning about IPAs. So some people call me the queen of IPAs around here. That's my jam. So I love IPAs.
Awesome, merci. And then we have Andréane.
Bonjour. Je m'appelle Andréane Anis. I'm a teacher in Fort Worth, Texas, currently in a hybrid situation. Grateful for the opportunity to reflect deeply about feedback and assessment, and over the last several weeks to hopefully have something meaningful to present to you. I was touched. And so I teach at Fort Worth Country Day in a high school, and I also teach virtually at one schoolhouse. And so that did prepare me when the pandemic came over, and maybe gave me a little head start that way. I'm really thankful for all of you working so hard at your craft. Thank you kindly for being here today.
Absolutely. That is such a wonderful way to say that. And I'll throw this in before we go on. It's sort of funny because I did these webinars with the AATF all summer, since March, right? Since the March. And so my students like, gosh, you know what you're doing when you have the Zoom class. I said, I believe I have a little experience these days. We're good. Anne Denontier.
Oui, bonjour. Je peux me présenter en français, ça va?
Bah oui.
Donc moi, normalement j'habite en Californie, au sud de San Francisco. J'enseigne dans un lycée de Palo Alto. Alors cette année, je suis en année sabbatique parce qu'il faut que je m'occupe de mon père. Et là, je suis donc à Paris en ce moment. Sinon, dans ma région de Californie, je m'occupe du grand concours, moi. Donc, je suis administrative du grand concours. C'est ce que je fais pour l'AATF. Voilà. Et donc, je suis très contente d'être avec vous ce soir. Et j'ai enseigné AP et puis français 2. Donc, voilà. Et dans notre lycée, nous sommes distance learning. Ouais.
Wonderful. OK, merci beaucoup, Dan. Et il est quelle heure chez vous alors?
Ben là, il est minuit 6.
OK, voilà. Déjà. Donc,
j'ai bu du café. J'ai bu du café.
Quand il y a des gens qui veulent
tard
vraiment...
en France, donc ça va aller.
Oui, merci d'être bienvenue. OK. So, là, j'ai pris une photo. I'm going to take a moment real quick and show you. This is my little ATF promo time. I wanted to remind you that the ATF provides so many resources for teachers, organized, authentic resources that you can pull into IPAs, to curricular units, thematic units with global essential questions. So excuse the dogs out there, they're not mine, I'm really sorry. When you look at our playlists, we have something like 4,000 videos organized into 85 lists. Okay, so there's always something, and I make sure that they are from the entire Francophone world. I invite other people to help curate these videos. So once I add you, you can add videos that you find that you think are appropriate for the school. And I seriously ask you to consider just being a part of this collaborative work as we work together through multiple instances of teaching. We need those resources. Another a resource that we have for collecting, we currently have 1,586 bookmarks on our Wakelet collection. If you're in French teachers in the US, of course, you hear me say all the time, please, can we put this on there? And I do that because Facebook sucks, okay? It sucks. It's the worst place to organize our files ever. And I'm working on a website for the ATF that will be like EFProf, but it'll be a better, enhanced, and designed for US teachers. That's coming up here within the next couple months. But for right now, I want you to look at our Wakelet collection, okay? We have collected just so many, 1,500 different resources. So if you're looking for something for Fête et Tradition Mondiale, or le Service National Universel, or something with Identité, Cuisine et Géographie, le racisme, la diversité, when you click on a link, okay, so especially this one I love is for all the books that we have. So these are livres fleuves, Francophone publishers, books from all around the Francophone world, magazine, newspapers, livres numériques. Okay, just click on it. And then if you see something you like, you click on it, and it's basically like Pinterest, but it's organized. Okay, organization is the key to making all of this seem doable. If they're just random links that you find by happenstance on Facebook, it doesn't feel as secure. So when you look through these, sometimes people say, does anyone have an article for? And I always say, just take a look, okay? Because we've got even Société Inclusive, Droits Humains. I've got a bunch of teacher resilient pedagogy, and that's part of our offering to you, is that resilient pedagogy means that you can take what you're working on at a moment's notice, as we say, kind of like March, and flip it into a distance learning. So this resilient pedagogy, there are lots of articles and examples for you to look at. That's not necessarily something you would use in your class, but something like Tourisme engagé et responsable. We have infographics, videos, articles. blogs, everything that you need to pull in so that you, if your students don't have their textbooks at home, they're there for you. Okay, and the same thing, the Pinterest boards are even larger because I've been working on those for about 8 years. Do you see all these tableaux with thousands of pins with all those beautiful resources? So we're here to help you, we're here to support you, and we want you to know that if you want to start with looking for something, definitely stop by one of our curated resources. And one last thing is on the AATF website, when you go under resources, you're going to see the webinars and professional development link right here. You can click on that and you will have all of the webinar series that the AATF is providing. And we started off in March just making sure that all teachers felt supported with resources and those chats that we were having in all the way through May, excuse me. And then we have our professional development series. Our newest one upcoming in September on the 12th will be Pour la rentrée virtuelle, édition Souvenir du monde francophone. We really invite you to come and just practice your French because not all of us had a chance to go somewhere, French speaking somewhere, right? So we're just gonna have like a chat time. It won't be like a guided, how do I put this? It'll just be an open chat where you can bring some souvenir, some sort of memory that you have from a Francophone country and share and speak French. And that's what we do the best together, is build community among our teacher colleagues. You will get a chance to speak French with your colleagues from all different levels, please. And we said this, that some teachers feel like they're being judged on their French. And let's just remember that we don't do that to our colleagues, to ourselves, or to our students. We need to support each other. If I make une faute de grammaire, tant pis. J'ai essayé de communiquer en français, right? I've been saying this for years, and especially at conferences, that some people won't even present because they're worried that their French colleagues will tear them down for a little mistake. I don't see that happening in the Spanish teachers, so let's just make the agreement and let's just make that agreement that we take care of each other in all of our linguistic abilities. C'est clair? Bon.
Bien,
C'est clair?
ça c'est très bien.
Merci, parce que c'est ma mission. So we are going to give you the links to everything, right, towards the middle. So we have, right now, the first part is a breakout session, okay? And we're going to be sending you into random groups. You'll be with about, let's see how many people. There's 153 on right now. Woo-hoo. We'll try to make it between 7 and 8 people per group, okay? Choose someone in your group who is going to go on to this Padlet and ask any more questions. So you'll have about 10 minutes just to talk about what did you learn from the pre-recorded sessions. So Tim, Lisa, Adrienne, and Anne made these sessions for you. They did like the flipped learning. They recorded theirs, and if you haven't gotten to them yet, don't worry. You'll be able to go back to the sessions. It's right here on the next one. If you go to after our presentations, there's Tim's video right there. You can go watch that. Plus, he also shared his presentation in Google Slides. So if you in your groups have a question that you wanted to ask further support with, you can go onto this Padlet, ask the question, and then Susie and I will just paddle like ducks and make sure that we try and get your question out there. So you have 10 minutes, pick one person who's going to go onto the Padlet and add a question or a comment or a resource to our Padlet, okay? So I will send that link out a couple more times, but for right now, I need to put you in group. Bonjour, okay? Bonjour, bonsoir. I hope that you had an interesting time in your breakout room. It's important to meet people in the same situation as you, and just that, like a few minutes for a little conversation, un petit pour la rentrée rapide. It's a way to connect with other people, and we're going to be sharing some more ideas. So now what we'll be doing is, Susie's made a good collection. It's so impressive how fast she does this, of the questions that were on the Padlets, and she's just gonna call those out. Any of our presenters can answer this. We're going to direct it maybe to one and then open it up to all of our speakers tonight. For now, I'd invite you to go ahead and mute. If you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand, and then we'll invite you to unmute during that time so that we can allow the space for conversation. Susie, do you have a question for one?
Yes, yes. So the first question is for Tim, and they're asking, can you elaborate on teaching students self and peer assessment skills? Which skills are best to teach them, and how would you engage them in learning those or in using those skills?
Sure. So the self-assessment skills, I think, have to come first before the peer assessment skills. And I think that what makes sense to teach them is to give them some multiple choice around like looking at feedback and categorizing what, you know, for example, if you've said, so let's say you're looking at text type, right? Or if you're looking for novice learners to stretch their sentences from 3-word sentences, then you might be very specific and say, look at the number of adjectives you used and count them up, and then go back and make a decision in which sentences can you add more adjectives to have 2 adjective descriptions, or what are the connector words you can use to then take sentences and combine your ideas. You might do the same thing as students progress in their proficiency with really concrete concepts like adjectives, adverbs, maybe when they're moving out of the novice world and they're getting into the intermediate world, to then start to look at synonyms. I always worry about doing too much with synonyms with novice learners, because it's enough for them to get their head around those, you know, those very basic, like 1 word for this and 1 word for that. But as they're going into the intermediate world, I think that's the appropriate place to start looking at synonyms, other ways to say the same thing, and to work from there.
And just a quick follow-up, Tim, as someone is asking, how accurate do students tend to be when they assess whether they can do a thing versus can do something with help?
So in the beginning, and I started to answer that on the Padlet, in the beginning, you really have to hold their hands and walk them through, and you have to give them the opportunity to assess and say, your assessment's not on target, right? You said you can do it, but show me the evidence, right? And you have to have that so this is where it's a little bit trickier to do it when you have this asynchronous world, because you can't pull your chair up next to a kid and say, let's take out your physical portfolio and look at examples, right? But that's sort of the idea, is you want kids to look for evidence in their work and to train them to have a portfolio of their work, whether it's electronic or physical, so that they can look for evidence and begin to identify evidence, starting out with very concrete things and teaching them how to do it with the concrete things before you ask them to do it with something that's more abstract.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to move on to a different topic now for Lisa. This question is asking, how do we go about remotely administering common IPAs in Google Classroom or some other learning platform? What would that look like logistically?
I did try to talk a little bit about that in the presentation. I mean, I think it's hard. I think, as Catherine was saying earlier, that sometimes we have to change some of the questions that we ask. For the writing, I know I tried to give some really some examples. I thought a lot about that, and I just thought about if you go back to the presentation, there's a link to a draft process, kind of a process writing that I just thought to myself, how can I make it easier to just do it than do Google Translate? So the example I had the students start with, you know, on one slide, I did it in the form of a slide presentation, but on one slide, what words are you going to use? So that was one slide. And how I would do it is not allow them to continue until I had that from them. So then it would be, okay, make really short sentences with those. So that was the second slide, use that vocabulary for short sentences. And the next slide, they had to expand on those sentences by adding who, what, when, where, why information. And the next slide, they had to add some transitions and put their sentences in order. So as my thought, if I actually require them for each of those steps, not only would it be a great way to teach writing, but also there would be no reason to use Google Translate. I mean, to do that, you'd have to work your whole way backwards. So that's what a way I thought to avoid the Google Translate question for writing. I think reading is going to be harder. What I talked about in my presentation was rather than that template that the ACTFL gives us in the IPA manual, I would use a lot of graphic organizers, because in a graphic organizer, everyone's going to use language differently. It's not, you know, it's not a right or wrong or same answer. So it would be much easier to see if someone's work was not individual to themselves.
Thank you. This question is for Andréane. People want to know more about Class Dojo. How often do you give students and parents feedback on their participation using Class Dojo? And is there a grade entered in your grade book based on that participation? Can you talk a little bit about that? Andréane, you're muted right now. We can't hear you.
I'm so sorry. I wanted to know if you could see my screen, and no wonder nobody was responding. Je m'excuse. Okay. So Class Dojo is free, and to me, it's a way to quantitate subjective participation, in my opinion. Okay, so there's all kinds of tutorial as to how you use it. In the beginning of the year, as we learn students' names and set the tone, it helps to have a place to keep track of what may be defined as a participation grade. So at our face-to-face school, we have a rubric that includes 3%, which is mainly about staying in the target language, which explains why I take double the points off away if English is spoken without asking, est-ce que je peux parler anglais? Alors là, je vais vous partager ce document où je vais vraiment une étape après l'autre, d'accord? Alors, ce que j'ai fait hier, c'est que quand vous cliquez sur Skills, vous pouvez identifier vous-même ce que vous voulez. Vraiment, c'est comme vous voulez le faire. Alors, moi, je l'écris et en français et en anglais parce que parfois, s'il y a un étudiant avec lequel on a un problème ou s'il y a un parent qui veut savoir pourquoi son enfant n'a pas reçu ses chers 3%, ben là, je peux vraiment le montrer puisque c'est bien écrit en anglais. Alors, dans ma classe à moi actuellement, c'était 1 point, surtout si tu gagnes à un jeu. Parce que souvent, moi, je donnais un bonbon francophone ou quelque chose comme ça pour un jeu et là, on ne peut pas. Alors, comme ça, je vais les cumuler et puis, quand vient l'heure des interros, ben là, je vois qui va avoir un certain, je ne sais pas, un +3 ou un +2 ou un +1 sur l'interro parce qu'ils ont gagné régulièrement. Je vous ai parlé dans ma présentation que je les encourage à écrire des notes 2 fois par mois. Alors, dans ce document, je réexplique avec plus de détails puisque la question a été posée là, au niveau du carnet de notes. Et puis, si tu as vraiment ajouté plus que ce que je te demandais, je te donne encore là, ici, un point supplémentaire. Par contre, on peut ajouter des trucs négatifs. Alors, est-ce que tu parles en anglais? Et là, moi, j'ai mis le double des points. Est-ce que tu es en retard? Est-ce que tu n'as pas ceci ou cela que tu devrais avoir? OK? Alors, à vous de déterminer ce qui en est. Ils entendent un son positif quand c'est ici et là, un son négatif. Alors, je sais que ça les encourage parfois à rester aux aguets. Actuellement, je suis plus que positive. Tout le monde a 100. Alors, vous voyez, j'ai mis 67 trucs. Ça, c'est dans une classe. Oui, dans toute une classe. Et puis, c'est simplement que je veux justement avoir cette… il y a une autre question, quelqu'un qui demandait la différence entre rétroaction et le feedback, et ce sont vraiment 2 synonymes qui peuvent être interchangés. Moi, il est vrai que j'utilise plus souvent le mot feedback, mais c'est la même chose. Je vous encourage aussi, si comme moi, vous avez maintenant un advisory ou un homeroom. Alors moi, je dois avoir mes étudiants ici à tous les jours 40 minutes de plus qu'avant pour qu'il n'y ait que la moitié des étudiants de upper school qui soient en train de manger à la cafétéria et l'autre moitié qui soit en classe. Et puis, ben, avec ces étudiants-là, on n'a pas de points. Alors, Class Dojo, ça m'a permis de le faire. Alors là, ils ont dû faire une petite vidéo, My Grade Staycation, etc. Et puis, ben, ça me permettait d'ajouter des points. Et puis, à la fin, je trouverai une petite façon de les célébrer d'une façon à l'autre. Alors, j'avais promis ça et il y a quelqu'un aussi qui avait demandé cette feuille-ci que je n'étais pas capable de placer à cause que c'est du format différent. Alors là, je vais vous mettre ce document-ci dans le chat. Alors, comme ça répond à toutes les questions.
Merci beaucoup. D'accord, d'accord. Alors, la prochaine question, c'est pour Anne. On aimerait savoir la meilleure façon d'enseigner le bon emploi de Lingway. Est-ce que vous avez déjà fait une leçon, tu as déjà fait une leçon avec Lingway et comment l'utiliser?
Oui, alors j'ai pas fait une leçon spécifique juste pour enseigner Lingway, mais dans mon tutoriel, j'ai montré une leçon que j'avais préparée où il fallait que les élèves cherchent des mots dans un texte qu'ils avaient à lire, et j'avais exprès choisi des mots qui, en fonction de leur contexte, pouvaient avoir des définitions différentes. Donc, en fait, avec cette recherche de mots qui avaient des définitions différentes en fonction du contexte, ils étaient obligés de me montrer qu'ils comprenaient suffisamment le texte qu'ils étaient en train de lire pour trouver la définition correcte du mot qu'ils cherchaient. Donc, je peux vous montrer, j'avais fait un exemple, je ne sais pas si vous voulez que je vous montre, c'est dans mon tutoriel, c'était avec mes français 2, hein, donc c'est quelque chose qu'on peut faire en fait avec tous les niveaux. Et donc, en fait, quand on lit Lingway, effectivement, on a d'un côté en anglais donc des phrases dans lesquelles le mot anglais est utilisé, et de l'autre côté en français, donc comment ça a été traduit, et ça aide effectivement à comprendre le mot dont on a besoin en fonction du contexte.
D'accord. D'accord.
Ouais. Je ne sais pas s'il faut que je montre la leçon que j'avais préparée.
Ça va. Tout le monde a accès. And perhaps people haven't had a chance to look at that yet, but I know what you're referring to.
Ouais, je vais mettre le lien de cette leçon dans le chat, comme ça.
Oui. D'accord. Merci bien. Tim.
De rien.
Excusez-moi, Tim, another question for you. Can you give some examples of specific feedback which shows the contrast between descriptive and judgmental feedback?
Sure. So a lot of times you see teachers say something, so even something as simple as good job is judgmental, right? Something that points out, well, we went over this last week, is judgmental, right? And so a lot of times our sort of temptation is to point to kids that you should have been paying attention because this was covered. And when you look at sort of the kinds of feedback, when Harvard Graduate School of Education did some research on categorizing feedback, right? And this is the kind of feedback that they saw, not language teachers specifically, but teachers across content areas give things like noting to students, you should have been paying attention to this. And that's the sort of, judgmental feedback that calls into question sort of personal character. And so to really think of contrasting specific with general feedback, and then judgmental with descriptive feedback, right? Because that's when we want to look at that matrix, right? Those are sort of the contrasts.
Okay, thank you very much. And just a quick follow-up. Someone is asking, what kind of praise is detrimental?
Praise that's connected to student work. So it goes back to that self-worth, and is my self-worth connected to my performance on this piece of written work, right? We absolutely need to praise students as part of our relationship building, but separate that praise from the feedback we're giving on whether or not their work met a standard of some kind, right? So it's not that the praise itself is detrimental, it's how the praise is used and then interpreted by students as detrimental, because it takes the attention away from the work.
Okay, thank you.
In my presentation, if you go to the Google Slides, there's a citation there where you can click, and that particular paper is available online, so you could take a look at what the authors had to say in more detail than that, and maybe with more clarity than I was able to explain it.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing up the background, the research. I think a lot of us need to hear that it's okay to not give points or to give pointless feedback, like good job. There was one question in the chat about 1-point rubrics. I will be staying on later after the chat, so if there's someone that wants to talk about those, I pulled up a few examples. Right now we're working with our presenters, but do any of our presenters use 1-point feedback, 1-point rubric or feedback? I do too, yeah. Tim, do you have any insight what you could say on that?
Yes, so insight number one is I actually have it, I'm gonna cut and paste it into the chat. Can I do that?
Yes, please.
And I might have to change the sharing settings after I do that. Once we start, oh, I'm clicking on screen share. I'm clicking in the wrong place. Once we started using a single point rubric, I would never use anything else. I think what's important is that when you have a program, everybody who's, say, teaching French 2 should agree on what are those criteria for success for whatever your target is for French 2, to have some proficiency, so text type, vocabulary, comprehensibility, to have those kinds of sort of standard targets that stay the same throughout a course based on a proficiency level, and then to add can-do statements so you have your language functions, right? So that if you've asked a student to talk about family and the student wrote about automobiles and hasn't done the task, then you're not stuck with a rubric where you're only rating proficiency. They might have done a really nice job writing about automobiles, but they haven't done the task, right? And so I'm going to put right into chat right now the single point rubric that we use, and it's essentially the same rubric that we use at the middle school and high school level. Differences in what it looks like, but it's essentially the same thing. All right.
Okay, thank you, Tim. And since we're talking about grading, Lisa, I have a grading related question for you. What's the percentage of each IPA and homework, quizzes, projects? How do you weigh each category to evaluate students' performance?
Sure. So what I like to do in my classes, I had 5 different categories and each was 20%. So my categories were interpretive reading, interpretive listening, interpersonal, and presentational speaking. I put those together, and that's a kind of philosophical discussion we could have. Presentational writing, and then miscellaneous. So in my class, the IPAs provided, each IPA had a reading, a listening, an interpersonal speaking, and a presentational writing. So each IPA gave me a grade in one of those, in each of those 4 performance categories. And then anything that wasn't an IPA in my class went in that miscellaneous. So I made sure to give at least 2 IPAs per quarter, so that the students had at least 2 grades each 9-week quarter in each of those categories. And then they had dozens and dozens of miscellaneous grades. So any given miscellaneous grade wasn't worth very much. So it's kind of like some people do summative and formative. All of those miscellaneous scores were formative. Certainly, I think if you're in a teaching situation that's ready for it, I think it's great not to assign grades at all for those formatives. We're not all in a situation where we can do that.
Mm-hmm. And just to follow up, if I recall, you have your grades divide by skills, correct?
Exactly. And I chose that just because I find that students, for example, interpersonal speaking and presentational speaking are going to be, it's a very similar skill compared to interpersonal writing and interpersonal speaking. So I really found that skill was closer than the mode, or if we look at interpretive, a lot of students can read well, but they can't listen very well. So I like to divide it according to skills rather than the modes for that reason.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, Andréane, question for you. The framework that you give for feedback, do you find that it's more effective given orally or in writing?
It depends, I believe, is the answer for me. So if it was an oral assessment, I feel that I should reply orally, because most likely there are things about pronunciation that I want to make sure that this way I will provide the right, I will model properly for them. And then when it's in writing, most of the time, my rétroaction is in writing as well. However, just like Tim said in the middle of his beautiful presentation, sometimes we get a little tired of typing and dealing with accents and whatnot. And so I too find myself orally recording my feedback for the students, and then there will be something written. But I agree with what he stated as well. I think it's wonderful for the kids to hear our warmth and enthusiasm and interest in them that way. And so it depends is truly the answer. It's a combination of the what should be more meaningful for them and what sometimes helped me, since we are stretched I don't want to say a little thin, but that is the reality, right? And so that's my answer.
Definitely. And a few people were asking about the language for feedback. When you're giving feedback, Andréane, do you give that feedback in English or in French?
As much in French as possible, because they know by then what it means. If it's something they don't know, or if it's a level 1, I will write it both ways, because I'd like to I don't know, get them to that. Sometimes we know, even with AP students, that if we just switch for a few seconds in English, it solves it so quickly that it happens that way as well, right? Especially when it's the gray area. So I'm sorry to be vague, but the true answer is it depends. I gave several examples in my presentation, and I added some in the document that I shared here today, and about a couple minutes ago it was changed that anybody with this link has access, and so hopefully you'll find more language there.
Would anybody else like to weigh in on that feedback question, English or target language?
Tim.
I think it's Laura Terrell who says, ask the question, can you say with confidence that your students will understand the feedback and be able to be, engage in that metacognitive process about the feedback in the target language? And so when they can, then we want to maximize the target language. But if they can't, then it's an appropriate use of your 10% or less time in English. But as Andréane just said, I think there are ways to scaffold it. What kinds of feedback can you get them used to, patterns and routines of feedback used to in the target language, so that then you can build them to sort of doing feedback with some sentence starters and sort of build it to there. But you have to, right, if we want them to receive the feedback, John Hattie talks about this a lot. If students don't receive the feedback we're giving them, then it's really, it's just we're spending a lot of energy for something that's not leading to any uptake on the part of students. So that's always the question, can they do something with the feedback we're giving them?
Okay.
I'm going to be sharing Laura Terrell's NFLC video. So there's a little bit of time left to watch those. Laura Terrell's, anything that you can find on YouTube from Laura Terrell and her books with Donna Clementi, please look into those for excellent ideas on how we change from this point grabbing, this game of school that students want to play, to honest feedback that supports their growth towards their linguistic goals.
Okay. Anne, une question pour toi à propos des rubriques que tu emploies. Comment est-ce que tu fais pour la conversion en points ou en pourcentage?
C'est une question pour moi?
Oui. Tu veux que je réponde?
Oui, parce que j'ai montré des rubriques dans mon... oui, j'ai montré des barèmes dans les exemples que j'avais. Eh bien moi, dans mon... Donc on parle de gradebook, là, ouais. Donc moi, en fait, j'utilisais un grading scale qui était 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, 100%. Donc 80% is an A, 60% was a B, 40% was a C, a D was 20%, and then 0 was an F. So I was actually using a grading scale for my grading book that would match my rubric.
OK.
Oui, je ne sais pas si c'est clair, mais...
Donc c'est une sorte de conversion.
Ben, c'est-à-dire que dans un grading book, on définit la grading scale qu'on utilise, et la plupart des gens utilisent 90% ça fait un A, 80% ça fait un B, 70% ça fait un C, et etc.
Oui.
Et alors après, quand on utilise un barème, si on utilise pour chaque critère, par exemple 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, on peut pas demander au gradebook de calculer directement une conversion entre un barème 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 avec une grading scale 90, 80, 70, 60, 50%.
Mais justement, alors comment est-ce que tu fais pour aller de...
Eh bien, moi, ce que je fais, c'est que je n'utilise pas la grading scale 90, 80, 70, 60, 50. J'utilise une grading scale globale pour mon gradebook qui est différente et qui, en fait, correspond à 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, c'est-à-dire que j'utilise, comme je disais, 80, 60, 40, 20 et 0%.
Mm-hmm. D'accord. And I would just add that in my school, I teach in an IB school, and each department was required to develop a conversion chart because the IB scale or MYP scale is through 7, 1 to 7. And so as a department, we were required to say, what's the percentage for a 7? What's the percentage for a 6? So if you're using rubrics, I think it would make sense to work with your colleagues to make that determination.
Oui, absolument. Donc, en fait, c'est vrai que c'est difficile pour chaque prof de changer son grading scale. Mais alors, si on veut que les barèmes correspondent à la grading scale qu'on a, il ne faut pas mettre 4, 3, 2, 1 ou 5, 3 dans les rubriques. Il faut mettre 9, 10, 8, 7, 6. C'est tout.
Mm-hmm.
C'est-à-dire qu'il faut mettre des chiffres dans les critères des barèmes qui correspondent à la grading scale.
Okay.
Donc, j'ai aussi fait des rubriques comme ça, c'est-à-dire que si l'élève réussit bien, il a un 9. Donc, dans mes barèmes, je vais avoir des chiffres qui vont correspondre à ma grading scale.
D'accord.
Donc, je vais avoir 10, 9, 8, 7, 6.
Okay, merci. So going back to feedback and how this is managed, Tim, this is a question for you, but others might want to weigh in too. What sort of system do you use for managing feedback? And do you have strategies for large classes? If you have more than 35 students, for example, how do you manage feedback for that many?
A lot of caffeine. No, honestly, give shorter assignments, have, feedback banks, sentence banks for yourself of feedback that you would typically give, so that you can either cut and paste or even, X things off and hand a form to a kid. But getting accustomed to giving shorter assignments and being able to give 2 to 3 pieces of feedback and letting go, like we might really hear that grammar error and want to comment on it, but the reality is the research doesn't support, there's no correlation between our giving lots of grammar correction and students actually improving their grammatical competence, right? And so we should continue to model good grammar for them. We should point it out in some ways, but I think language teachers spend a lot of time giving feedback on grammatical errors that actually doesn't lead to improved student performance. So if you can let go of some of that, that frees up a lot of time. But really, shorter assignments and dollops of feedback, 2 to 3 pieces of feedback, and then let it go. Also, build in these systems where once kids understand more about self-assessment and peer assessment and can just engage in those conversations with each other, that's a lot of the feedback is happening once they build that skill set. It's happening from student to student. I would love to comment on the 35 students in a class, and I have a confession to make that I've never had to experience that in my 30 years of teaching. And so that's a deficit of mine to be able to, I don't know what to say about that.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody else like to comment on that? We're coming to the end of the hour, but any other ideas on managing feedback for large classes?
I have one thought. Oh, let's start with Adrienne.
Quand on peut utiliser une feuille de papier et puis qu'on peut surligner des commentaires déjà préécrits, ça aide beaucoup. Mais là, avec COVID, je n'ai pas encore compris comment transposer ça.
So I'll be sharing some. Oh, okay. Vas-y, Anne.
Non, on peut se préparer un document avec le type document que l'on met d'habitude et puis faire des copier-coller rapidement quand on fait du feedback sur un learning management system. Ouais. Enfin, donc moi, j'ai souvent utilisé ça parce que le type de feedback que je donne, finalement, d'un élève à l'autre, il y a des choses qui reviennent souvent, des phrases qui reviennent toujours. Moi, je mets toujours mes feedbacks en français et donc j'ai des types de phrases qui reviennent assez souvent. Et donc, je mets ça dans un Google Doc et puis je fais du copier-coller au fur et à mesure que je donne je mets mes feedbacks. Ouais. Mais bon, ouais.
Okay.
C'est la même idée que Andréane. Hein.
Mm-hmm. Oui. Okay, Catherine, do you want to take it from here?
Okay, we have Can I
ask one thing of Tim? That they asked him to give his repertoire of comments for feedback. That would be great to get that because I'm kind of new at this.
In the Google Slides, there's a sample right there.
Where are your Google Slides?
I'll share that in the chat. Francine, it's what you would have, it's where his video was.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So we had 4 presenters this time. We've had 3, we've had 4, we've gone back and forth. This will be the only time that we're at this hour. Next time we will have on the 18th, is that correct, I believe? We'll be at 7 o'clock Eastern, so 4 o'clock Pacific. People in the middle, you know how to do the math. We love you. Actually, I've lived in the middle before, so I know what that's like to feel as well. We want to thank, first of all, Tim, Anne Dumontier, Lisa Shepard et Andriane. So, félicitations à toutes ces idées. Remembering that being a part of the AATF has been so powerful for many of us since March, since sharing all these ideas. We really we appreciate AATF members who have ideas on webinar that they'd like to present. So if you've got an idea, please share it with us and we'll try and work it in as we're going through this year. So many people are going to be offering ideas, but we want to make sure that your voice is amplified too. Since we didn't have a conference, if you're not going to ACTFL, if you're not going to your state, maybe present something at one of our webinars. So you can contact me, Catherine Ousselin, you know how to find me everywhere. Or one of our other organizers. We have Susie Hennessy. Thank you so much to Susie. And Catherine Ritz also. I'm sure Tim knows Catherine quite well. And we have such an amazing team here, but we're always looking for new team members. So please contact us. Now, here's the deal. If you want to stay on, this is like ATF After Dark. And you can, yes, ask me anything type of deal. This, of course, the recording will be shared probably within a week.